The girl could not have been more than 9 years old, and she was standing in the middle of the parking garage on level P2 of the Harrington Tower, waving both arms at a man she had never met in her life. "Sir," she said, "don't get in that car." Clifford Branagh stopped walking. He was 61 years old, a senior partner at one of the oldest corporate law firms in Toronto, and he was not accustomed to being told what to do by strangers, let alone by a small child in a yellow raincoat who was dripping wet from the March sleet outside. He had his key fob in one hand and his briefcase in the other, and for a moment he simply looked at her the way he might look at a motion that didn't make sense on its face, with careful, suspended disbelief. "I beg your pardon," he said. "That car." She pointed at his black Volvo. "Don't get in it." Clifford looked at his car, then back at the girl. "Why not?" She didn't answer right away. She pressed her lips together the way children do when they're deciding how much of the truth to give an adult, calculating how much will be believed. "There was a man," she said finally. He was under it. He had not expected that morning to become the kind of morning it became. It had started, as it always did. Clifford rose at 6:15, made coffee in the kitchen of his Rosedale home, read the digital edition of the Globe and Mail on his tablet, and ate 2 slices of toast with marmalade while standing at the kitchen island because he had eaten breakfast standing up since 1987 and saw no reason to change. His wife, Renee, had already left for her studio. She was a ceramicist, and she had a kiln firing that morning. He sent her a text that said good luck with the kiln, and she sent back a small flame emoji and a red heart. He drove downtown, turned into the underground parking at Harrington Tower at 8:42, found his reserved spot on P2, and cut the engine. The garage was quiet at that hour, the kind of cold, gray quiet that underground parking structures always have, with the low hum of ventilation and the distant drip of water from somewhere in the ceiling. He reached for his briefcase on the passenger seat. That was when he noticed the girl. She was standing about 30 feet away between 2 concrete pillars, watching him. Not wandering, not lost-looking, watching. She had dark curly hair plastered flat from the rain, and a yellow raincoat that was a size too big for her, the sleeves coming down past her wrists. A small backpack hung from one shoulder. He assumed at first that she was waiting for a parent. He picked up his briefcase, pushed open the door, and stepped out. He pressed the lock button out of habit and heard the familiar double beep, and that was when she rushed toward him. "Sir, don't get in that car." He heard her out. He was a lawyer. He heard people out. And when she told him about the man, he felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature in the garage. "Tell me exactly what you saw," he said. She told him. She had come into the garage with her mother, who was parked on P1, and had gone back upstairs to get her wallet from the office. The girl had ridden the elevator down by herself because she said she would wait in the car, but the elevator had taken her to P2 instead of P1, and she had stepped out confused, looking for the stairwell. And that was when she had seen the man. He was crouching at the rear of a black Volvo, not kneeling the way someone kneels to check a tire, lower than that, lying almost flat, reaching underneath the car with both arms, his cheek nearly against the concrete floor. "He had a light," she said, "like a phone light. He was shining it under there." "Did he see you?" She shook her head. "I went behind that pillar," she pointed. "He was there for a long time, then a door opened on the other side and he got up really fast and walked away." Clifford stood very still. 30 years of legal practice had taught him to keep his face neutral when the contents of a room shifted around him, and he kept it neutral now, but his pulse had changed. "When did this happen?" "Before you came." "Maybe," she thought about it. "Maybe 20 minutes? He looked at his car. The black Volvo sat exactly as he had left it that morning, angled slightly in the space, rear bumper facing him. Ordinary. Patient. "What's your name?" he asked. "Simone," she said. Then she corrected herself. "Simone Beauvais Tremblay." "Simone," he said. "I want you to do something for me. I want you to go back to the elevator, go up to level P1, find your mother's car, and wait inside it with the doors locked. Can you do that? Are you going to call the police?" "Yes," he said. "I am." She studied him for a moment with the seriousness that certain children carry naturally, a kind of gravity that has nothing to do with age. Then she nodded, turned, and walked toward the elevator bay without looking back. Clifford did not move toward his car. He stood where he was and he took out his phone and he called 911. The officers were there in 11 minutes. 2 of them, then 4, then a forensic technician in a white vest who crouched at the rear of the Volvo with a flashlight and a pair of nitrile gloves and said, in a voice drained of all surprise, "Yeah, there's something here." What they found was a device attached to the undercarriage with a magnet, small, black, rectangular, approximately the size of a deck of cards. The technician photographed it extensively before removing it. He did not tell Clifford what it was, only that it would need to go to the lab. The officers asked Clifford a series of questions, and he answered them carefully, and they took his contact information, and one of them walked him up to a different vehicle, a firm car, driven by a junior associate who had been called and told only that Mr. Branna required a lift. He sat in the back of that car and looked out at the gray March sky and thought about the question that had been circling him since the moment he stood in the garage. Who? Because the more important question, the device, the danger, the near miss, that could be handed to the police, to the firm's security consultants, to the people whose job it was to trace and analyze and prosecute. But the who was not their question in the way it was his. The who was something he had been carrying, he realized now, for longer than that morning. He had simply not known what shape it was. The device, he was told 3 days later, was a GPS tracker. Not a bomb, not a tampered brake line, a tracker. Someone had wanted to know where he was going. That was, in some ways, more unsettling than the alternative. A bomb was a conclusion. A tracker was a beginning. His name was Clifford William Branna, and he had spent 31 years at Harrington and Colhoun, the last 14 as senior partner. He had handled mergers, dissolutions, high-stakes commercial litigation, and the kind of estate disputes that turned families into strangers. He had, over those years, made adversaries. He knew that. Anyone who did his kind of work knew that. You did not help one party without, somewhere, disappointing another. But as he sat in the firm's boardroom with the 2 security consultants the firm had retained, a woman named Catrianne Voss and a man named Darrell Fenwick, both former law enforcement, both with the particular stillness of people who have learned that stillness is a professional asset. He tried to be honest with himself about who specifically might want to surveil him. There was one name he kept returning to. Warren Spate. He said the name aloud. Catrianne wrote it down. "Tell me about him," she said. Warren Spate was not a client. He was the opposite of a client. He was the man on the other side of the longest, bitterest estate dispute Clifford had ever worked, a case that had consumed nearly 3 years and had concluded 14 months ago with a judgment that had gone entirely, in every particular, against Warren Spate's interests. The dispute had concerned the estate of Spate's father, a man named Bertrand Spate, who had built a modestly successful chain of industrial supply warehouses across southern Ontario and had died without a will, or so Warren had claimed. Clifford's client had been Bertrand's younger daughter, a woman named Pauline Ostroff, who had produced through Clifford a handwritten codicil that Bertrand had signed 11 months before his death, leaving the majority of the business to her. Warren had called it a forgery. He had hired his own experts, his own lawyers, filed 4 separate motions to delay proceedings, and had, at various points, accused Clifford personally of fabricating evidence, coaching witnesses, and bribing the document examiner. None of the accusations had gone anywhere. The handwriting was authenticated. The codicil was upheld. Pauline Ostroff had received her share. Warren Spate had left the courthouse on the day of the final judgment without speaking to anyone. His lawyer had submitted the obligatory paperwork. And then, 2 months later, Clifford had received an email. It was brief. No subject line. It said only, "You think you won, you didn't." He had forwarded it to the firm's general counsel and thought little more about it. Threats of that kind, in his experience, were usually the sound of impotent fury dissipating, the bark of a man who had run out of legal options. But he thought about it now. Catrianne and Darrell thought about it too. Over the following week, quietly, through channels Clifford didn't ask about in detail, they began looking at Warren Spate. What they found did not immediately answer the question. It complicated it. Warren Spate, it turned out, had not retreated after the judgment. He had, in fact, become quite busy. He had retained a new lawyer, not in Toronto, but in Ottawa, and had filed 2 separate complaints with the Law Society of Ontario alleging professional misconduct by Clifford. Both complaints had been reviewed and dismissed. He had also, according to records Catrianne described as publicly available, though Clifford could not imagine where, contacted 3 of Clifford's former clients with what appeared to be inquiries about their experiences with the firm. None of this was illegal, technically. All of it was consistent with a man conducting a slow, methodical campaign of harassment. None of it explained a GPS tracker on a parking garage floor. "He could have hired someone," Darrell said. "He doesn't have to have placed it himself." "To what end?" Clifford asked. "What does knowing my location tell him?" "Patterns," Catrianne said. "Where you go, who you meet. If you're building a case for misconduct and you want to catch someone doing something, even something as minor as a lunch meeting with a client you're not supposed to be talking to, knowing someone's schedule is useful." Clifford considered this. "There's nothing to catch me doing." "That's almost never the point," she said. He did not tell Renee about the tracker. Not immediately. He told her about the device, in the garage, the police, the investigation, Those things he told her on the evening of the first day, sitting in the kitchen with the overhead light on and the sound of traffic outside, because she would have known something was wrong, and she had always, in 33 years of marriage, preferred to know. But he did not tell her about Warren Spate, or the email, or the quiet surveillance that Catriane and Darrell were conducting. He told himself it was to protect her from worry that might be premature. He knew, even as he thought this, that it was not entirely true. The fuller truth was that saying Warren Spate's name to Renee would have made the thing more real in a way he wasn't ready for. Renee had a gift for cutting to the center of things. It was one of the qualities he had fallen in love with, and also occasionally found bracing, and he suspected she would say something that he would not yet be equipped to hear. He went on with his days. He took firm cars to the office and home again. He was aware, constantly, of being aware, of noticing who was behind him on the street, who was parked across from the building, which cars appeared more than once. He had not lived this way before. He did not particularly enjoy it. 3 weeks after the garage, Darrell called him. "We found something," he said. "Can you come in?" What they had found was a photograph. It had been taken outside a restaurant on King Street West, a place Clifford went perhaps once a month for lunch, a narrow Italian place with good bread and no television screens. The photograph showed Clifford entering the restaurant. It had been taken from across the street, at some angle, cropped to eliminate context. His face was clear. The photograph had found because it had been sent to two members to two members of the Harrington and Colquhoun Partnership Committee in an anonymous email that claimed, without specifics, that Clifford Branagh was conducting unauthorized meetings with opposing counsel in an active litigation file. The opposing counsel in question appeared nowhere in the photograph. Because Clifford had not been meeting opposing counsel, he had been having lunch alone. "It's fabricated," Clifford said. "The photograph is real," Darrell said. "The claim attached to it is fabricated." Clifford looked at the photograph for a long moment. It was strange to see yourself from the outside, cropped out of context, reframed as evidence of something you hadn't done. He thought about what Catriane had said weeks earlier. That's almost never the point. The point, he now understood, was not to catch him doing something. The point was to make him look like someone who might. "The email was sent from a proxy address," Catriane said. "We can't trace it directly to Spate, but the timing," she slid another sheet across the table. "The Law Society complaints were filed in March and June of last year. The tracker in the garage was placed this March. This email went out 5 days ago. There's a pattern here. It's been escalating." "Why now?" Clifford asked. "It's been over a year since the judgment. Pauline Ostroff is selling the business," Darrell said. "We checked the public filings. She's the buyer 2 months ago. She announced a buyer 2 months ago. The sale closes in April. Once that happens, there's no reversing it. No further legal avenue for Spate. This is the end of his window." Clifford sat back. He thought about the 14 months since the judgment. He thought about Warren Spate leaving the courthouse without speaking. He thought about the emails with no subject line, the 2 Law Society complaints, the photograph taken from across the street. He thought about a man watching him through a proxy screens, constructing a narrative from pieces of a life he could observe but not understand. He thought about a 9-year-old girl in a yellow raincoat who had come down a floor too early and had seen something she wasn't supposed to see and had stayed. He called Pauline Ostroff that evening. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious the way it had been cautious throughout the litigation, always expecting another development, another motion, another delay. He told her in general terms what had been happening. He left out the details that were still under investigation. He told her that her brother had not, apparently, accepted the outcome, and that she should be careful, and that she should make sure her own counsel was aware of the situation. There was a long silence on the line. "I always knew it wasn't over for him," she said finally. "Warren doesn't. He doesn't let things go. He never has. Even as a kid. If you beat him at something, he would find a way to make you sorry for it, even years later." "How is the sale proceeding?" Clifford asked. "April 3rd, she said. Nothing's going to stop it. The buyer's a solid company, the financing is in place, the due diligence is done. If Warren had a legal challenge, he would have filed it by now." A pause. "Is he dangerous? I mean, physically?" Clifford considered the question honestly. "I don't know," he said. "The track record so far has been surveillance and paperwork, but the fact that someone physically went under my car," he let the sentence finish itself. "I'll tell my husband," she said, "and I'll call my lawyer." The case broke, as these things often do, not through strategy but through a mistake. Warren Spate made 2 of them within 4 days of each other. The first was that he contacted one of Clifford's former clients again, a man named Douglas. But this time the contact was not a quiet inquiry. It was a proposal. He offered Douglas a fee in writing to provide a statement claiming that Clifford had advised him improperly during a transaction 12 years ago. Douglas, to his credit, had saved the message and brought it directly to Clifford. The second mistake was smaller but more consequential. A security camera in the parkade at Harrington Tower, one installed after the March incident, one Spate presumably did not know about, had captured footage from 3 nights earlier. A man who was not an employee, not a resident of the building, not a visitor with a registered plate, had entered the parkade on foot through a stairwell at 11:47 p.m. and had walked to level P2. He had stood near Clifford's new parking space. Clifford had changed spaces after the tracker incident and spent 7 minutes on his phone before leaving. The man's face was visible on 3 frames. It was not Warren Spate. It was a man who, through the careful work of Catriane and Darrell over the following 48 hours, was identified as a private investigator who had been licensed in Ontario until 2019, at which point his license had been revoked following a complaint. His name was not a name that meant anything to Clifford, but he had, according to records they were able to obtain through a legal process. Clifford deliberately did not inquire too closely into, received 3 wire transfers over the past 4 months from a numbered company that was, after several layers of tracing, registered to a holding entity with one director, Warren Spate. Clifford took all of it to the police. He took the tracker, the photograph, the fabricated email, the written proposal to Douglas, the parking footage, and the financial records. He did it through a criminal defense lawyer he trusted. Not someone from his own firm, because he was careful about things like that, and he let the process work. It took 6 weeks. These things always take longer than you believe they should, but they move, and they do not stop once they start. Warren Spate was charged with criminal harassment and attempting to obstruct justice. He retained counsel. The matter would not be resolved quickly. It would take months, possibly was now fixed, and the weight of it had shifted from Clifford's shoulders to the mechanism of the law, which was, he supposed, the appropriate place for it to be. He went back to the parkade on a Tuesday in April, the day after Pauline Ostroff's sale closed. He had decided to reclaim the space, his original reserved spot, not the one he'd been using since March, partly as a practical matter, and partly, he admitted to himself, as a gesture. He parked the car, sat in it for a moment with the engine off, and listened to the quiet of the underground. Then he took out his phone and opened the Notes app, which he used for almost nothing, and typed a name. Simone Beauvais Tremblay. He had not been able to reach her after that morning in March. He had given her name to the police, and they had spoken with her and her mother as witnesses, and through the firm's security team he had obtained contact information, but he had not known what to do with it. Or rather, he had not known how to do what he wanted to do in a way that would not seem strange or overwhelming to a child who had simply, on an ordinary morning, done the right thing. He knew now. He had Catriane write a letter, not on firm letterhead, on plain paper, in plain language, that explained, without details that were still before the courts, that the matter the girl had helped prevent had been resolved, that the people responsible were being held accountable, and that her action had mattered. He included his phone number and Renee's number, and he said that if Simone's family ever needed anything that he could help with, legal advice, a reference, anything at all, they should call, without hesitation. He sealed the envelope himself. He thought about what she had looked like in the parking garage, wet from the rain, waving her arms at a stranger. He thought about how she had asked him if he was going to call the police, and how she had waited for his answer before she moved. He thought about the fact that she had, by every reasonable measure, no obligation to him whatsoever. She did not know him, owed him nothing, had nothing to gain from intervening, and that she had waved her arms anyway. Some things, he reflected, could not be reduced to calculation. Some things were simply what a person did or did not do. When the moment came and they were the only one there, he had spent a career in rooms where people talked about principles and then looked for every available way around them. He had learned, over time, that the talk was often just talk, and that the real measure of a person was a much quieter thing. It lived in the gap between what was easy and what was right. It lived in a 9-year-old girl, standing between 2 concrete pillars in a cold parking garage, deciding whether to say something to a stranger. He put the envelope in his inside jacket pocket, picked up his briefcase, and took the elevator up to the lobby. Outside, the April light was doing what April light in Toronto does when it finally arrives, falling sideways and gold through the streets between the buildings, the kind of light that makes the city look briefly like somewhere warmer. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment before going in. Then he went inside, took the stairs to his floor, hung his coat on the hook behind his office door, and sat down at his desk. There was work to do.